Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers again. David said that. It's a day where we want to celebrate fathers. We stand with those who are grieving. We know that fatherhood's a mixed journey. So we stand with those who have always wanted to be dads and that has not been a part of their journey. We stand with you. I did a little bit of a writing retreat this week, and my bookmark this week was from many years ago from our middle son, Josh, and he gave me a laminated bookmark that says, "Daddy, I love you," with a little picture of his smiling face. He probably didn't know that 15 years later it would still be my favorite bookmark. But I was up at the Prince of Peace Abbey in North County, and I just looked at the bookmark at one point, and I just kind of started to weep and thought about the gift of fatherhood. Fatherhood is a place where we, not only pour out, but for me, it's been a gift. It's been a place of receiving love, Josh doesn't care how I do in life. It's about our relationship. And for all of my hard wiring to evaluate my life based on performance, it's our kids, and our middle son is our affectionate one, the one who hugs us. And I have really learned from him what it means to be loved unconditionally. And as I was looking at the bookmark, I just felt like the Lord was saying, I love you more than Josh. And I was kind of like, more than Josh? Like, I don't know about that. Like, really? Like, you love me more unconditionally than Josh, because Josh doesn't care if I'm completely screwed up. And it's like, we sometimes need those tangible things, right? We talk about things like grace when we gather on Sundays. We talk about, Jesus' unconditional love. But sometimes, for all we talk about it, it's more up here than in the heart. And fatherhood's one place where it's really become tangible for me. Like, oh, you love me more than Josh. Okay, I get that. I can feel that. I know what that means. So we celebrate with you, fathers. Enjoy afternoons. Enjoy calling your fathers, or hopefully you're getting messages if you are a father. It's also a week where our nation's been grieving. It's a week where we've been torn apart. Last week we spent some time and we prayed for those who are grieving. It's a week where we've seen images of a pastor in Sacramento saying just kind of horrible things, celebrating the massacre. It's a week where our nation has been divided over what happened and over why it happened. It's become almost like a political, just a ball just getting batted back and forth. And in the midst of all that, we want to be people who stand with the hurting, who stand with the broken. I was really excited to hear that last Sunday night, Patrick was at a vigil with the LGBT community, and then Monday night, Michelle and a number of people, Viet from Coast, others were in Hillcrest down at the flagpole, just being with those who are mourning and walking alongside. We're just called to be a light in our city, to our city, for our city. Last Sunday night, Michelle and I were at a press conference with the mosque next door, and we just wanted to be there and say, you are our neighbors, and we're with you in a time when there's a lot of suspicion. We stand with you. There's one little note on that press conference. It was very interesting to be a number of faith leaders. I got to say something, Taha, the imam, said something, and then NPR just brutally misquoted the leader of the press conference. And it was a reminder to me that, like, when you're there, always, think twice. When we hear press, even press we think is like very respectable and very thorough, and then it's not actually a fair representation. So that's just my little note. Anyway, we want to continue to stand with those communities and be a different kind of witness in our culture. Our culture is so hungry for hope, so hungry for a picture of life in the midst of division, and we want to be a church that brings life, that represents Jesus in our city. This morning we're going to continue in the series Hearing God. We're going to be in John 10 all month. We've been in this series. As I've been saying, it's sort of preparatory series. Next month we're going to be talking about being sent out to heal, but the whole thing is going to be kind of based on the idea of listening to God, like what is God actually calling us to do. So we started with just the promise that we worship a God who speaks to us. Jesus says, my sheep will hear my voice. Following Jesus means hearing his voice and responding to that. Last week we talked about, how do I really know if it's God? There's competing voices around us. There's often competing voices in us. How do we tell whether it's God or whether it's not God? That's a pretty audacious claim. In this culture, it's a very audacious claim. This morning, we're going to look at the reality that God is speaking all over the place. God's not just speaking in the walls of the church. God's not just speaking to people who name themselves as Christians, but actually, Jesus says some bold things about where God's speaking, and we're going to look at that this morning, and then next week we'll look at the security, the depth, and the power of what happens to our souls when we really hear Jesus' voice. I want to begin each week. So far we've had a brief kind of report from the field. Patrick's going to come on up. Give Patrick a warm round of applause. Patrick's got a cool story about God speaking. Patrick.
Oh man, I put the bar up there.
Go for it.
But I guess it's good and lives get changed, huh? You know, it's really cool that we actually get to be a part of what the Father is doing on the earth in any small way, big or small, we get to do that. And so a few weeks back, I was walking on a prayer walk on Wednesday morning, and I went away from my normal spot where I normally go and pray, and the thing that God has to remind me because I doubt a lot. And in that place, as I veered off the normal track, I actually ran into one of my old neighbors. And in the context of actually having a conversation with her, I was able to pray for her. I just kind of felt like I should pray for peace for her. I saw a cigarette in her hand. I kind of was thinking she was stressed a little bit. But also, after I said that and I prayed for her, she was blessed. She started weeping, and she was just really touched by that moment. And in that place of just getting to be able to pray for her, just in something that seemed somewhat obvious or whatever, it was a special moment. She started to tell me about a time just recently, where she had been in a tough space with finances, and she was basically out there trying to figure out how she's going to make some money. And so she prayed, she prayed, Lord, help me, I need some help today. She goes out and she panhandles in a place right near to my place, and she ends up seeing the Lord give her $2. She saw $10 come in, and she was telling me that after she saw these things happening in her life. And I think the Father's doing stuff around us, and it was cool to see what he was doing in her life. And I took a moment right there just to see what was going on with her, because I started to share with her probably a pretty broken down version of the gospel, but really good stuff, I think, because Jesus takes and gives us righteousness we don't deserve, right? So I was telling her how about the wrath of God was coming upon humans, and actually Jesus actually takes that wrath and she was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And so when she liked that, I was just like, okay, there's more here, stuff I learned from Ireland. And so as I did that, I realized, man, she's ready. She's ready to kind of meet God a little more. I'm not sure how much she knew already, but as I prayed later through the sinner's prayer. She had embraced me when we were praying this, so it was like we were arm in arm on the side of the street. People were probably passing by, what, And so she was, it was a really cool moment. And so, God's doing good stuff.
Yeah. How did that feel, Patrick? Real quick. Yeah. How did it feel to be a part of that?
It's just fun, being part of God's work is just the funnest thing you can ever do. We get to be a part of something that deeply meaningful, that the Papa would give us such responsibility a little bit to do stuff in this place. And so I was just really shocked in some ways, though. I was surprised, just that she was where she was at that time and how open she was. A little skepticism coming in. So, mixture of that.
Right on. Thanks, Patrick. Patrick, you're right on. I just want to highlight that there's a neighbor for Patrick is wouldn't identify as a follower of Jesus, wakes up and prays, God help me. It's interesting how many of our neighbors who distant from faith, other faiths, who they suddenly hit the end of the line for whatever reason, and their morning isn't wow, I'm just a secular person going through my secular day. Their morning is man, God, I need some help. And all of a sudden she takes a sort of physical thing, asks for some money, but then Patrick comes along and it's God answers the prayer. right? That's the surprising thing. People with no faith background all of a sudden have this sort of breaking point. God help me. And what do you know? God actually answers a prayer. And what I want to talk to us this morning about is expecting them. Like living with expectation. We live in a world where God is speaking. God's speaking to surprising people. God's speaking to neighbors who we might think, God, that person has like no connection with God, and yet that's where God's speaking. You may have a boss who feels, or a coworker who just feels like antagonistic or deeply skeptical, and you don't know that they might have just woken up and right after, their Cheerios, they might have said, God, I need some help today for real. And God may be answering prayer. And so we want to live with expectation. We're going to look at John 10 in just a second. One quick shout out. We're doing the Bring Life Healing Conference. Nick and Carrie from Northern Ireland, from Southern California via Northern Ireland, are here this morning. So shout out to these guys. They're actually the church planters. So church planting is approximately the scariest and perhaps the stupidest thing you can do in Southern California. And also one of the most life-giving and wonderful things you can do. But we are going to be praying for you guys. We're looking forward to walking with you. We're really grateful that you're here. Everybody meet them this morning, linearly, not all at once. But anyway, we're grateful you guys are with us. I grew up in a very conservative Presbyterian church, lots of suits and ties. The pastor's name was Mark Brewery. The church exploded, it grew really large. He became the pastor of Bel Air Presbyterian out here for a while. It did great. But while I was going to the church, I was running as fast as my legs could carry me away from God in high school. And I studiously, I carefully did not pay attention. I don't know if you've ever been in a context, maybe this is sort of my teen rebellion. I had to go every Sunday and I had to dress up. I wouldn't go to the youth group because that felt like it might be relevant to people like me. So I only went to the adult service, and I studiously, I carefully avoided absorbing anything that was said. And I did that for 4 years, but one message I still remember to this day. One message, the pastor took a break from normal, and they had it was a, I don't know. It was a little bit more conservative context, right? But one Sunday, he just told his story of coming to faith. And I'll never forget it. He talked about how after his schooling, he began to drive a truck, and it just immediately got my attention. Like, this guy was an 18-wheel, like a big rig driver, which is not the normal background for large church, upper middle class Presbyterian pastors, as far as I know. But he was just driving a truck across the U.S., and he said, driving trucks is boring, so he started using drugs just all the time. Heavy drug user. And one afternoon after driving the truck, he was on an acid trip, and he said in the middle of the acid trip, Jesus appeared to him and spoke to him and said, I'm calling you to follow me and to be a pastor. And just sitting there in my studious, like, I'm not paying attention, I'm not paying attention, I'm not paying attention. What? What did you just say right now? Did you just say you're a truck driver who did acid all the time and Jesus met you on an acid trip? And I just thought to myself, could God be like that? Like, no. And then I kind of went back to not paying attention. But it wouldn't get out of my head. It wouldn't get out of my head that was his story and he's sticking to it. And for whatever, and I saw this church was thriving. He came out here, Bel Air Presbyterian, and when he, it just started thriving. Many of you probably don't know the story of that church, but it took off when just like God's blessing was on him. And it just stuck in my head, like I couldn't get rid of it. Like he says, for whatever it's worth, he says that it was in the middle of an acid trip. Like, does that make any sense at all? Is that how God is? And it just stuck with me. I didn't figure it out at the time, but it did stick with me. We're going to pray and read John 10 this morning and think about God speaking in broader ways than a lot of us expect. Lord, thanks so much for your word. I ask that you bring it alive. Bring our faith alive in our city, Lord. Give us eyes for what you want to do in this city. Give us a heart for those around us, Lord. I ask for our neighbors, for our co-workers, for our kids, Lord, that you'd speak, Lord. Speak out beyond the walls of the church. And Lord, I thank you that you speak whether or not we're listening to start out with. Your voice thunders over this earth. In your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, a world where God is speaking. We're going to take a couple of verses here and dive into them. We'll go deep in just a few verses. Jesus says this, starting in verse 16 of John 10, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Well, the context, if you go back to John 9, Jesus has healed a blind man, and there's a big controversy because it's on the Sabbath. And so the religious, sort of the fundamentalist crew is mad at Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, and they interrogate the man. They interrogate his family. His family is scared. His parents are scared of the religious authorities who are upset that this Sabbath rule is broken. And Jesus is in the process of saying to them, basically, my sheep hear my voice. And last week we looked at the tough verse where Jesus says, and basically, you're not my sheep, you're not listening to my voice, but my sheep do know my voice. And then he says there's wolves and there's hired hands that run away when the going gets tough. There's false shepherds. There's thieves that go in and try to steal the sheep. But he says, I'm the good shepherd, and my sheep listen to my voice. And he's going along kind of in that stream. And then in verse 16, he takes a turn and he says, I have other sheep that are not of this pen. And when he says that, I imagine that a lot of necks snapped in the audience. I don't think that's what a lot of people wanted to hear there. Because when they're thinking sheep pen, they know what he's saying. What he's saying is, you guys, this whole Jewish crew in Jerusalem, all the faithful people of the book, the people following Torah faithfully, my sheep hear my voice. There's people in this kind of cultural group that I'm watching over and I'm shepherding and they're following me. But I have people that aren't from this pen. Translation, I have Samaritans, I have outsiders. There's people from all over the place who are going to follow me, and they're going to listen to my voice. And Jesus has this habit of right when things are going well, like throwing a wrench in things. And if you think Jesus is like really polite to a fault, like just you want to brush that idea out of your mind. He's always kind of throwing the grenade in. In Luke chapter 4, rather, Jesus gives this kind of mission statement in the synagogue. I've come to open the eyes of the blind and to free the oppressed and to announce the year of the Lord's favor. And everybody's super excited. And then he says, and by the way, there were lots and lots of lepers in Israel, but the one my father healed is Naaman, like the commander of the enemy army. That's the one that my father healed. Just kind of like you're really, really excited about this, and what you don't realize is it's not just for you, it's for everybody. And they get very mad, and they go from applauding to trying to kill him, which is also kind of what happens here. So just a big idea this morning where we're going to go is that God's at work in the people around us. God is at work. And I almost put like in the not religious types, and in people from other religions, God's at work. God's at work in places that surprise us. And almost all of us have a box for where we think God would work. Some of us have a micro box where we think God actually doesn't work anywhere. Some of us have a decent sized box. Some of us have a pretty big box. But I think wherever you expect God to work, what Jesus is saying is God is working out beyond that as well. He's at work all around us in all kinds of people. I think of Isaiah 42, let's check this out, verses 5 to 7. I love this passage. I just kind of want to read it over us. I, God, the Lord, created the heavens and stretched them out. He created the earth and everything in it. He gives breath to everyone, life to everyone who walks on the earth. And it is He who says, I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. I will take you by the hand and guard you, and I will give you to my people Israel as a symbol of my covenant with them. And you will be a light to guide the nations. You will open the eyes of the blind. You will free the captives from prison, releasing those who sit in dark dungeons. And notice that it's like God is speaking to his servant, and this is a prophecy. This is kind of the mission of Jesus written out ahead of time, 800 years ahead of time almost. You will open the eyes of the blind, and you will free the captives from prison, releasing those who sit in dark dungeons. So I want to talk about for just a few minutes living with expectation in a world where God is speaking. Because when Jesus says these things that we just read in John 10, I think he's aiming at our expectation. He's aiming at the expectations there. He's not just giving them information, but he's changing what they expect. I have sheep that aren't of this pen. So here's three things to just try out of this passage. I want to aim at kind of our lives. What would it look like if we actually lived with expectation that God was speaking around us? What would it look like when you go to work in the morning to actually expect God speaking like way beyond the edges of the faith community? First of all, try watching for where Jesus is drawing people. Verse 16 says, I have sheep that aren't from this sheep pen. I must bring them out. And the word must is really strong. It's like an urgency. There's an urgency to the love here. There's an urgency to the mission. There's this sense that like it needs to happen right away. Jesus is saying, I must draw them. Last year, one of our kids had a little bit of a life bummer. They're in the witness protection program, so I'm not going to share too much about the details, but just as a dad, you've got kids that have a bummer, and it's trying to draw them out, just be with them and hear their heart. I could tell they were down and just kind of give them extra hugs. And I found myself, this child was in their room with the room cracked, and I like look around the corner and just kind of sneak a look in and see what they were doing. Kind of see the child's head hung down, and I just found myself walking by the room a lot and asking them a lot, how are they doing? And just trying in different ways to draw them out. Because I love them. And I wanted to draw them. And the language here is the language of drawing. Like the Father is drawing people. Jesus says, I've got to get them into the pen. I've got to bring them into. There's people who are distant who I'm bringing in, and we want to expect that. Just like Patrick's neighbor woke up and prayed, there's people that the Lord is drawing. There's people that are ready because the Lord loves them and has been wooing them and drawing them. And I think it really changes how we see things when we start to imagine God's probably drawing this person. I think that God is at work drawing people. One of the things we're going to do this week, a few of us are going to go. We were invited by the mosque next door. There's an iftar on Wednesday night, a break fast. It's Ramadan right now. A few of us are going to go. We're invited to kind of a ceremonial iftar. And it's really different. I find that my whole worldview is different when I start to expect that God is drawing people. Is Jesus in the midst of all this drawing people? Or am I just, kind of in my own silo with God? We want to be expecting that God is drawing people around us. Okay, so try watching for that. Try listening for where Jesus is speaking to people. Jesus is speaking in so many surprising ways. Try listening. What if we lived with the expectation that when you're with that like secular coworker, that skeptic, that person who's down on the judgmental Christians, that person who just told you, can you believe that Sacramento pastor who's such an idiot? Well, I agree. But there's people, we're hearing these messages around us, right? We know the highly skeptical, the people who might think that followers of Jesus are the problem, not the solution in America. What if we just approach them with the expectation that God is actually speaking? With the reality that in surprising ways. Here's a little full disclosure. I've shared part of this story before, but in college I was one of the antagonists. There were 2 Christians who lived on the floor underneath me in college, and I knew they were Christians. And so we played basketball on purpose on the 4th floor at like 2 in the morning, just to bother them. Which I don't say with like pride, but like I've been on the other side of things. I've been on the antagonize the Christian side of things. Not in a harsh persecution way, but in a like pushing hard way. And I suppose because they did invite me to a Bible study and it didn't go very well for them when they did that, I would suppose they might have thought of me, that guy's like really far from God. And it's really sad. And there was a ton of brokenness in my life at that time. But then, just within a year of when that happened, I was standing at a cake party in UTC a couple miles from here, holding a red cake cup in my hand. And suddenly I thought about the old Clint Eastwood movie, Magnum Force, and the line in that movie, "So punk, do you feel lucky?" Some of you know this story. And all of a sudden I had like a hair-raising feeling that it was Jesus asking me, "So punk, do you feel lucky?" And my emphatic answer in my heart was no. And I put my cup down and I walked out into the front yard. And I said, "I'm going to follow you. I know my time is up." And I had a counselor speaking in my life. There were all kinds of things going on in my life around me. But I didn't know that God spoke through Clint Eastwood. I just didn't know that. You know, and it wasn't like John 3:16 or something that went through my mind. But you know what I needed to hear that night was, "So punk, do you feel?" That was my heart language. You think you're all that? In front of the living God, do you think you're all that? And it just changed everything for me. Like, oh no. And kind of my pride that I've been living in, there was like a puncture that happened. And some people say, you know, the Old Testament fear of God, don't worry about that. God's loving now. And I think, no, I need the fear of God in my life. It was a good thing for me. And it was the fear of God. Like, my life is in the hands of the living God. And I think this message that I just got it feels like the end of the line for me. But God is free to speak when we're running away. And I think it's kind of God's irony that the one message I remembered from growing up was like, could God really speak in an acid trip? Yes. He can speak in keg lines? Yes. He can speak in bedrooms? Yes. He can speak in broken places? Yes. He can speak in wealthy halls of power? Yes. He can speak to a dejected woman who's considering panhandling? Yes. Can God speak to your lonely neighbor? Yes. Can God speak in the middle of a giant LGBT vigil? Yes. Can God speak in a mosque? Yes. God can speak everywhere and is speaking all over the place. And that's what Jesus wants to get across to them. Do not think that you have a corner on the market of listening to God. This week I went on just some blogs around, does God answer the prayer of non-Christians? I found blog after blog, some from leaders I respect a lot, that said, clearly no. Like, here's 5 scriptural reasons why God doesn't answer the prayer of non-Christians. And I thought, that's crazy. God delights in answering the prayer of non-Christians. A lot of people come to know faith precisely because they have the like, help, if you're there, God, I need help. And that's when the answer comes. Let's do a quick case study from Acts 10. This is Cornelius, one sort of example of what Jesus is talking about. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. For those of you who were around last month, we talked quite a bit about Peter's into this. So he's a centurion in a famous regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to God regularly. One day at about 3 in the afternoon, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius!" And Cornelius stared at him in fear. "What is it, Lord?" Which is also, could just be, "What is it, Master?" might be a way to translate that. He asked, the angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God." This person has never met Jesus. He's a Roman commander. "Your prayers have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He's staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. All right, just to unpack this little case example, God listens to Cornelius. God listens to him. God listens to the neighbor who says help. God is a God who listens. God listens to the prayers of human beings. God listens to all the types of prayers in our city. And we don't want to think that we've cornered the market. God answers Cornelius. And God answers him in a vision. God answers Cornelius. I was just reading a cool book called A Wind in the House of Islam with all kinds of stories. It's written by David Garrison, who is a Southern Baptist, meaning kind of evidence-driven and not given to hype, actually. I know friends of his. But one of the cool stories is about a man in Iran named Reza who talks to a friend, and the friend is a follower of Jesus and just says, I think God loves you. And he had a vision of Jesus immediately. And in the vision, Jesus says, I've come for you, now follow me. And it just changes his life. It turns him inside out. And I say that to say that a lot of us, I think, if we're honest when we're walking through lives, we kind of feel like any sort of spiritual influence that we have is like mostly our work to do. And sometimes we lose sight that God's working before we're there, and God's working after we're there, and God's working in a lot bigger ways. As Patrick said, it's kind of a broken down version of the gospel. I'm often amazed at what lame versions of the gospel God uses. Like, you don't have to get the words right. When we kind of put the ball in play, it's amazing what the Spirit of God will do. God answers Cornelius, and he says, send men to go get Simon. And it's interesting, God, this angel could have given Cornelius just a theological crash course, right? Assumedly, angels would have all the information that Cornelius needs to know. Have you thought about that? Like, the angel could do the whole thing, but the angel actually says, go get Simon. Go get this Jew who's not going to want to come into your house because there's a lot of food laws and kosher laws that say don't do that, but go get him. And so God's work actually is connecting the community. It's actually building relationships that would not have been there. It's building bridges that would not have been there. And it's relying on Peter's role in kind of a crazy way. I think if it was me planning this and I really wanted to see Cornelius understand about Jesus, I would probably have had the angel just tell Cornelius what he needed to know. But instead, God's plan is to have the angel tell Cornelius to go get a blockhead fisherman to explain to him what he needs to know. So Cornelius needs help to get the meaning of the message. He's been prayed, but he doesn't understand what God has done for him. He has not had an experience of coming into God's kingdom. He has not had an experience of being filled with the Spirit of God and his whole family receiving life, all of which happens in Acts chapter 10. But he needs Peter's help. When I look at the example of Cornelius, I'm aware that I think a lot of us either are on the side of things where we think God does what he wants to do, so we don't have a role. And I think that's the way some followers of Jesus live. Like, I just do my life. For people that are distant from God, that's God's responsibility. And then there's others of us who might think, man, it's all our role, like we have to go make it happen. But this is like a wonderful mix of God working, but of God also relying on Peter to be part of the process. Okay. Let's go back to the main living with expectation in a world where God's speaking. Just one more. This is just the last thing this morning. If we want to just remember that Jesus is drawing people, just try looking for where Jesus is drawing people. Try listening for where Jesus is speaking to people. And then 3, try picturing people who seem distant from God as spiritual family members. Jesus says, They're going to listen to my voice. I have these other sheep. I must bring them in. They're going to hear my voice. And there's going to be one flock and one shepherd. And I guarantee you that's not what that audience wanted to hear. Jesus is saying the Samaritans you don't like, they're going to all be in the family. Those Assyrians you don't like, they're going to be in the family. The Moabites you don't like, they're going to be in the family. The people from Tyre and Sidon in these pagan, crazy, sinful port cities, they're going to be in the family. And there's going to be one flock, not a bunch. It's not going to be a bunch of tribes, all one flock, and they're going to have one shepherd, and that's Jesus. But I think it really changes how we look at people when we start to see their destiny differently. If you look at people like this is their, like Jesus is drawing people. Try this, here's my kind of challenge. Try this with the most difficult people in your life. Pick someone who's hard. And just picture them in like a big family photo with you and God, like next to you. Pick someone hard. That coworker, the person who's most antagonistic towards you, just think of their destiny differently. Because that's what Jesus, he's pressing on them right now. He's pressing. There's going to be one flock with one shepherd. I have these other sheep. And it's going to be one flock. Try thinking differently about that and see if it doesn't change your whole perspective and how we treat people and how we go about praying for people. Okay, I want to finish just with this. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. What Jesus is saying here is, you understand that I've come to die for the sheep. I've come to lay down my life for you. I've come to lay down my life for this city. I've come to lay down my life for others, and I'll take it up again too, which is a pointer at the resurrection. But we need to live with this reality that every person we run into is one who Jesus died for. And right now in our national dialogue, there's such a tearing away at the value of human life. There's such a tearing away at human dignity, isn't there? There's almost a slashing, there's a character sort of slashing happening that cuts across human dignity. And let's be a people that not only speaks about others, but lives with and among and prays for in all that we do. Let's remember that that person you're with, that person who you're criticizing, that person in the media who's on the opposite side from you, that's one that Jesus died for. Like, this is how much they are valuable. Let's all stand. Worship team, if you guys want to come on up. It's going to take a minute to pray as we go into worship. And all this month, we've been practicing listening to God. And this morning, before we sing our closing song, I want to just invite you to ask a question in the presence of the Lord. And even if you're brand new to prayer, even if you wouldn't even consider yourself a follower of Jesus, if you've never had an encounter with God, I still want to invite you to just put this in play. And here's the question. God, is there someone in my life that you're drawing to yourself? I want to just ask the Spirit of God to highlight for us. And so just try to dial down. Try to listen. We'll spend just like a minute listening. Holy Spirit, right now across this room, I ask that you'd show us faces. I'd ask that you'd give us names. If there's anyone that you're really drawing, just in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our families, Lord, anybody that you're drawing, anybody that you've been working on, maybe in a hidden way. Would you just reveal it now? Would you speak to us? this Father's Day, we say, Father, we thank you that you love this world so much that you sent your Son, Jesus, to die on a cross. That whoever, that anyone and everyone who trusts in him will have eternal life. Show us who you're drawing, Lord. Show us if there's anyone you want us to reach out to. So let's worship, and then we always have a time when you can get prayer for anything at all that you want prayer for. Prayer team to come on up. Since we're singing that song, Come Fall Afresh on Me, that might be something you're hungry for. So like, man, I could really use the Spirit of the living God to fall afresh on me. We'd love to just pray for you, pray with you. If you are just beginning a spiritual journey, if you're new to church, welcome. Love to pray with you. Following Jesus. Maybe this begins with a very simple prayer, something like, I want to follow you. Something like, I hear you drawing me. I'll follow you. For some of us, it starts with a simple prayer like, God, I've blown it in lots of ways. Receive your forgiveness. We'd love to pray with you. If you're at the beginning of a journey with God, we'd love to pray with you. You can come up, anyone would be happy to pray with you. You may have some other just prayer need or prayer request. Welcome to come on up. Let's hold hands across the aisles. We do this each week as a reminder that we are a community of faith. Don't follow Jesus alone. We're just across the aisle you're in, there's men and women, there's people from many different ethnicities, there's people from different generations, and every single row going back. We're a diverse community, but we're one flock following one shepherd. The shepherd who speaks. Lord, thanks for your voice, thanks for your love, thanks for the cross. Thanks that you're bringing life into our city. Lord, would you help us to be a church that brings healing to the great wounds in our city? Would you help us to be a church that gives hope to the brokenness and the division in our country, Lord? Would you help your people to shine for you and to model love and forgiveness and the power of the kingdom of God in a time when many are crying out in despair? We love you, Jesus, and we go out in your name. Amen. God bless you guys.